Hey, welcome to Black Coal Woodworking. My name's Matt. Today I'm making some small bowls. I got this idea from another YouTube guy who does a lot of bowls. His name is Kent, and you can find him over at Turn a Wood Bowl. Anyway, so what I'm doing, I took a log out of the fire pit, basically started with that and took off all the bark that I could, and then I stuck it on the lathe and used my handy little skew chisel to bring the log down to round. And once in a while, I gotta pause and sharpen it. And what I found works for me, if I don't need to take it over to I use a belt sander to do some major grinding if I need to. I use a small little stone. It's probably about a 400 grit. And I'll end up stropping it on my leather glove. And that makes it really sharp. And so that's what I use. Here I'm still just trying to get this thing down to round and get all the bark and even that little bits of bark kind of gone so that this thing's going to be nice and smooth. Hey, if you're new here, consider subscribing. Thank you. At this point, I think I'm getting pretty close and kind of decided that when I actually do the bowl, then I'll finalize the shape. And so now it was time to start working on the tenon on the end. That way I can change out the live centers here and put in my, I guess it's a 4-jaw clamp, I guess, that I stick into the lathe and turn it, the rest, or a lot of it anyway, that way. I needed to still refine this log a little bit. That way it would spin a little more true, not have quite as much vibration, even though it's pretty smooth already. Just more refining that could just spin all the better. Here I'm putting the log into my 4-jaw chuck and putting it in nice and tight. I did make a shoulder on it so that way I have something to press it up against when I put it into there. Make sure it spins true, and then, set my tool rest. Of course, I got to sharpen again. And now because I've put it into the chuck, I found that it's just a little bit off again, so I'm just truing it up a little bit more, getting rid of more vibration. That way it's just a little bit easier to work with. At this point I start marking out where I want to have that cut. But I'm not going to cut it yet because I need to put another tenon on the other end of the log. That way I have a bit of an easier time grabbing onto the thing when I want to start the next bowl. I've often said the lathe is the most fun tool in my shop, but I'm so inexperienced with it. I'm trying desperately to learn how to use my skew chisel. Among other things, hollowing out an end grain bowl is something that I'm having a lot of learning to do, so you're going to watch me learn as I go. Here's kind of where I make that initial tenon, and then I like to use the skew chisel to sharpen up that dovetail kind of, I guess that's the way the tenon grabs, is there's a small dovetail in there. So I use the skew chisel to make that shape. And then I create the shoulder, which is what that 4-jaw chuck will bump up against when I clamp it. So now that I got that, I'm starting to use my parting tool to essentially part off that part of the log so I can finish this one bowl. And I've never had that happen before. You didn't see anything weird, but I've actually never parted off a piece of wood and catch it. Normally there's a lot bigger jump and something goes flying, so I was pretty happy about that. It's now time to start hollowing out this bowl. I found this tool to work the best for me. I'm not even sure what it's called, but it's not really a spindle gouge, I don't think, and it's not a roughing gouge. It's a bit thicker, and just for some reason the shape of this thing ended up working out really well to hollow out this bowl. I even managed to learn how to plunge this thing into the center to give me a bit of a deeper cut so I can grab more wood out of there. I also found that if I don't get shavings and I just get dust, that means I'm not cutting it right. It's just tearing the wood out instead of cutting it out. I do stop and check the depth fairly often, as I am still learning how deep is deep enough. So far, looks like I gotta do a little bit more. I find that I often get a deep spot on what would be the bottom corner of the bowl, and the top lip I end up getting pretty thin. So it's always a spot I'm working on. Here I just use the skew chisel again to clean up some of the edges on the front lip of the bowl. Just makes a nice clean cut. It's something you can't really sand away, but if you cut it away, then you have all those little ripped out grains, they're gone. Then sanding becomes much nicer. And at this point, it's pretty clean. You can see I did have a chip out in the bowl in the back end there. That I can cut away now. And I'm just using kind of like a jam chuck. I'm really just jamming it against my chuck. It's not normally how a jam chuck works, but it worked for me because it didn't actually make a jam chuck yet. So here I'm just giving it a bit of a taper, or a round taper, and I want it to have a nice kind of flat spot on the top part of the bowl like you see in that profile. So I'll just keep refining this guy here as I go, using my skew chisel again because it slices through the wood fibers pretty nicely, and it allows me to have a very clean cut and much less sanding. I always have trouble with this part where I'm trying to get the wood away where the jam part of the chuck meets the bowl, because I don't really have a good way to get rid of it otherwise, other than trying to sand it away later, and that gets pretty tricky. Now, I don't normally like to show a lot of sanding, but in my opinion, sanding on a lathe is a lot of fun compared to sanding any other place. Now, I still try and do whatever I can to make sure I have less to sand, but if I'm gonna have to sand, a lathe is probably the best way to do it. Alright, it's finishing time. So I like to turn the lathe down as slow as I can and put my finish on it, which in this case is a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. This is a food safe kind of finish. I guess the only risk is if you use too much and somehow you manage to eat it off the bowl, you can get diarrhea, and that's kind of what it's been approved for. But the likelihood of you giving yourself an incident to go to the bathroom with a bowl like this is so low, it's, not really going to happen ever. So again, here I'm just trying to get rid of as much wood as I can. This is just a really tough part to sand later, so I'll do my best here, and then I'll take it over to the belt sander and try and just sand away that little nub. But I don't think I'm going to show you that part because it was awkward and I slipped a few times. So now it's time to finish off the inside again, so I'll just stick this back into the chuck. I realized I needed to refine the inside of the bowl a little bit more now that I had the final shape on the outside. Shop Wolf number 3 is running around, as you can tell. Again, it's really nice to see those shavings, and I just kind of keep checking to make sure that I've got a nice smooth inside. And I'm also checking the wall thickness of the bowl. I don't really want to make this thing too thin. Time to do a little more sanding on the inside just to make sure that it's nice and smooth. On to the finishing. I find that it's a little bit better if I rub the finish into the wood a little bit before I start the lathe, otherwise it just goes flying all over the place and I've lost the finish itself. What I do is I make sure there's a good layer in the bowl, and then what I do with the same cloth is I dry it off, or at least get the excess out of there, and then it feels real smooth. This is the final product. I ended up making a few of these. One thing I didn't expect but was hoping for was that they would stack, and they do. Again, I am just new to this whole lathe thing and I'm just having some fun, and you're gonna watch my journey as I learn things. And I'm sure some of you will have some good advice for me as well. One area that I know I definitely need to work on is the bottom. Now I had my son burn in some design there on the bottom for me, and the rest of them you can see that I need to do some work on it. The little nubs didn't get quite sanded all the way, and the further I went with every bowl, the better I got. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.